please tell us something about yourself?
Okay, well, I live in the UK. I was born in Cardiff in Wales, the capital city of Wales. My grandparents were Irish. I lived in the north of England as a child, and then I moved to London. So I've lived in 3 cities, but I've also lived in a seaside town, a market town, and in villages. I was educated in both private schools and state schools. I have a degree in education, a teacher's certificate, but I'm now retired and I enjoy the arts, photography, cinema, reading, drama, gardening and walking and all sorts of other things.
Perfect. Avril, what's the life like living on the countryside in UK?
Well, it's very pleasant. In fact, some parts of the UK are absolutely beautiful. If you live in the Lake District or in Scotland or Wales, in some of the mountainous areas, you've got lots of lovely fresh air, countryside walking, very pleasant villages, and it can be very nice. It's healthy, there's not so much pollution, it's quieter, there are relatively few crimes, so it can be very pleasant. I enjoy living in the countryside, but usually if you're living in a small village in the country, you're further away from the shops, you're further away from hospitals and doctors and dentists, and it can be isolating. And also, as far as modern technology is concerned, some quiet remote areas still don't have things like the internet. So if you want to, for example, run your own business, it can be difficult because you can't get the internet, so you can do it from home. But if you like the quiet life, the countryside living is great, and I enjoy it.
And what's the pros and cons living in the city? The metropolitan cities like London.
Well, obviously the cities are busier, noisier, dirtier, and there's more crime.
Oh.
I mean, in the countryside, I've only ever seen examples of theft. I've never seen any murders. I've never been mugged. I can walk quietly around the country lanes and feel perfectly safe. I can do that on my own and not worry about anybody accosting me or anything. But in the cities, obviously, you have to be more wary. There are, a lot of people who are strange and maybe disturbed, maybe on drugs. I mean, I'm not saying there are no drug takings in the countryside. Obviously, people who want to take drugs will take them wherever they live. But the city is much more cultural variation. It's a multicultural society in our cities, especially in the inner cities. So you'll get all walks of life, from Muslims to Christians, from Chinese to French to Americans, the whole lot, Jews, everybody living together in our cities, and everybody is supposed to be considered equal, although there are those of us who don't see others as equal, but we are, generally speaking, a multicultural society. The advantages of the city is that you do have more facilities. You've got public transport to get about, so you can manage without a car. You've got all the lovely museums. You've got the sights, the Buckingham Palace, the Tower of London, and all those things to enjoy. But it's a very different, and there's a lot more pollution because you've got more cars. The air's not so good, and it's less friendly. Living in the countryside, we know all our neighbours. We have a population here of 200 people. We know most of them, and we say hello to each other.
Mm-hmm.
In the city, you could live in a high-rise flat and not know anybody living around you.
So the people living in cities don't actually care about their neighbors, and they're not that social if you compare them with people living in the countryside.
That's true. I think you can fall down and collapse in a city, and people walk past and take photos. Whereas here, if you need help from someone, you can ring up a neighbour and say, my freezer's broken down. Can you help and store our food for us for a week until I get a new freezer? And they'll be glad to help. Or if you've, fallen down and want to get to the doctors and you haven't got transport, somebody will come and take you to the doctors. In a city, if you walk up to somebody and ask them for help, they'll look at you as though you're mad and walk on. And I think it's a natural preservation thing, because when people are living crowded together, they want space and they need to protect themselves. So I think it's a natural way of just keeping a distance. You don't know who it is that's speaking to you, what they're up to.
Just on the lighter part, something popped up in my mind. Avril, as a Muslim, it's obligation. My prophet said a person is not a Muslim if his neighbors are sleeping hungry and he is feeding himself and his family, and he don't care about his neighbor. This is so much important for a Muslim, regardless if he's living in a city, regardless if he's living in the countryside. This is the obligation, in Islam, that you have to be social. Although if you don't like your neighbors, as a Muslim, it's compulsory on me that I have to take care. I have to take the responsibility of my neighbors too.
I think that's a very positive thing. I think that's very good. And I would say, in spite of what I've just said about living in a city, I would say that as a whole, the British people do care about their neighbours and do care about people who might be hungry. In fact, we are a nation that has hundreds of thousands of charities, because whenever the state can't do something, charities tend to step in. To take, for example, recently, as the economics have declined, there are many people struggling to make ends meet, struggling to feed their families, and so food banks have been set up, so that people who are struggling can go somewhere where they can apply and say, well, I can't feed my kids today, we're hungry, and they're given food. So I think as a general principle, we do care about our neighbours and do try to look after those who are less well off than ourselves or who are in need. But of course, there are exceptions.